Put that coffee down.
Recently, I've had a couple of different experiences, which has been quite interesting to me, where we have used the art of sales to get what we want. So it was funny. I was talking to Marco recently, and he applied for this house in Melbourne. He's just like, it's beautiful, like two-story, fantastic place, great view, all that kind of stuff.
So rental property to live in?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And he's just like, I really want it. And I was like, yeah, sweet, go and get it. So he provided me as a reference. And the guy called me and was like, is this real? I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, are you referring to how much money Marco makes? He's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, it's all legit.
Yeah.
I was like, how much money did he tell you? And I was like, oh, that's probably an underestimation.
That's conservative.
Yeah. I was like, he makes more than that. The guy was like, oh my goodness. So anyway, I had to kind of give the guy the background of him and the business and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, he didn't get the place. I was shocked. And so Marco calls the guy and is like, what's going on? He's like, oh, the owner just didn't think it was right. I think because he's like a 28-year-old guy, looks like a drug dealer. Yeah. Right? Basically is what's going on there. And so he kind of like left it for like a day or two. And then he's like, I really want this apartment. Like that. So he calls the guy and he's like, hey man, how are you? He's like, yeah, good. He's like, get any more applications? He's like, oh no, not yet. And he's like,
I'm guessing it's a very expensive apartment too,
it's not
right?
cheap. Yeah. It's not like crazy, but it's, I think for Melbourne, maybe it is. Maybe I'm skewed because I'm from Sydney.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
You know what I mean? And I was like, he's like, yeah. So he's like, well, are you still looking to lease it out? He's like, oh yeah. And then so.
Just not to you.
He's just like, okay, now he's trying to find a problem. He's like, all right, cool. So he's still looking to lease it out. And so he just goes through a full, like, okay, I'm just going to sell this guy into I'm the right guy for the apartment. So he's like, okay, man. So, like, what are you looking for in a tenant? Like, why wasn't I a good fit? Just kind of went through that kind of stuff. And then he's like, well, what happens, man? Another 2 weeks or 2 months goes by and you don't find a candidate that's makes as much money or is qualified or has as good a rental history as me. Like, what happens to you? He's like, oh man, I'd probably lose the listing. And Mark is like, well, you don't want to lose the listing, do you? He's like, no, why not? And the guy's this, and he goes, and like, I don't know, like, do you feel like my application was strong? He's like, yeah. He's like, why do you feel that way? Kind of reselling him and not him. And he's like, well, man, like, what happens if you lose this listing? He's like, oh, fuck, man, that'd be shit. It's a great listing. The owner has a couple properties with us. And he's like, well, man, like, are you really willing to settle for that? He's like, no. He's, why not? Like, that fully just took him through, like, solution, consequence. And then he's like, well, man, like, if you think, like, I'd be happy to reapply. But if I did, how do you think you'd go to the owner and, convince him that I'm the right guy? And he said to him, and he goes, do you mind if I make a suggestion? He's sure. And then he's told him how to sell the owner. Yeah. Right. Anyway, Marco moves in next week.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about the phases that he did there. So we've talked about, first thing is problem awareness. So he had to create the problem for the guy. Like, he's just thinking this is a listing, no problem. Like, someone will want it. Yeah. And so he had to create the idea that maybe nobody else does want it, right? Yeah. Or that,
or maybe the owner's got unrealistic expectations as to what he wants from a tenant. And so he had to kind of reveal that yes, there is a problem here. Like, you're looking to sell something, I'm looking to buy it. And it's like you haven't done that yet. So clearly there's a problem, right? So it's like, let's establish the fact that you still want to do it and that there is a problem. The next is like, what are you looking for in a tenant? You know what I mean? And kind of reinforcing some of the things that they're looking for, of which he ticks many of the boxes. And then it goes through like a consequence phase, which is really what it's all about here, is like, what happens if you don't find somebody? And they just probably never considered it. And so it's like, what that does is it's wrapping up some urgency on it so that the guys so that he can go, oh shit, like, I've got to do something about this. So then he can, and then by providing a suggestion, it's like, well, let's go back to the guy. And if I'm happy to help you out, man. Like, I'm happy to help you. I'll reapply, put everything in, you know what I mean? And then by seeing how he would go back to the guy, like, that's where you can see his sales pitch. And his sales pitch is probably trash. Right. So what you got to do is you got to kind of then coach him on how to do it. And what you would do is you would instead of going to like, hey, I've got this great tenant and he's really, really good and ticks all the boxes, like, that's not what you want. You want to go through it like a more of a problem base. It's like, hey, we haven't had that many people through. I haven't had many qualified candidates just because of the market, right? I have had one very qualified candidate, and I think he might still be open if we are able to come back to him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, would you be open to me getting in touch with the qualified candidate?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so it's like, yes, it is. So come at them with a problem. They're going to be more likely to, instead of just coming at them with like great solutions. And that's the same as in business. Like, you never want, especially like in my business in sales, no one's ever going to be responsive to the referral. Hey, speak to Matt. He's a sales killer.
Right.
It's just not a productive referral. You know, it's like, hey, go and speak to Matt. He really helped me overcome think about it objections.
Okay.
That's a great,
The specifics.
that's a great referral.
Put that coffee down. Coffee's for closers only.